So what I want to talk about today is the navigation drawer. I'll just show you an example that I cooked up earlier. So this is about as bare bones as I could get this navigation drawer to actually work. So I took some examples from Google and elsewhere on the internet, and I've basically stripped out all of the useless things that you don't really need to get navigation drawers working. So this is the example. You should all be able to see that. And basically with a navigation drawer, you've got this little drawer that you can slide out from the left-hand side of the screen, and you've got some menu options that you can click. You can also give them icons, which I'll show you how to do, and you can click on these and it will change the fragment for you. So there's with navigation drawers, there's a little bit of cognitive load to actually understanding completely how they work. There's like a bunch of new things over and above what we've looked at in the course that you need to understand. So it introduces the idea of a fragment, which we've kind of glossed over a little bit because it's one of the more complex topics with Android. But if you want to use a navigation drawer, you have to use fragments. And there's a few other things as well. There's menus, which we've looked at before, but in a different context. And there's also the navigation graph as well, which we also need to look at. So this is my very, very simple bare bones example, which will hopefully be understandable by you. I'll just show you the example that Google give you if you auto generate a project. So the easiest way to get navigation drawers is to create a new project, and there's a couple of different options. We've always gone for an empty activity, right? But there are other different options that you can go for. There's a bottom navigation activity that you could go with. There's all sorts of different options. The one that we want is the navigation drawer activity. You guys can explore the other ones later in your own time. So you just select that navigation drawer. And I'm just going to call this generated because Android Studio, it goes away and just creates the project for us. And something important here is that if you want this stuff to work on an older version of Android, then you have to include the legacy Android support libraries. I don't really care about that right now. I just want to look at the basics of how to use navigation drawer. So I'm just going to leave that unchecked. But if you want your application to work with this navigation drawer widget, then on older versions of Android, then you are going to have to check that little button. But right now, it just kind of makes things a little bit more complex. And it's already complicated enough. So we'll just finish that, and we're going to create this new project called generated. It's going to generate the code for us. And it goes away and it makes us a very, very nice, but also very complicated project that uses a navigation drawer. It gives us all of the code, and it downloads all of the support. It includes all of the support libraries as well. So we'll just wait for a little while for that to build. And we don't want to add this to Git. I'll just say cancel. Okay, so we've got our new project called Generated, and it's just opening up. And so just maximize the screen. And we'll just run this project, and I'll show you what you can do when you dress up your navigation drawer a little more. So you can see already that this example is a lot more complex. Okay, so that's installed onto the emulator. Okay, and here we go. So this is a much more fully fledged application, but it's still got placeholder fragments. So you can see here that we've got another navigation pane. This one's got a header. This corresponds to this nav header over here. So you can have a look and dissect and see how Google have created this little example. So it's actually not that, it looks quite reasonably complicated, but it's actually just an image view with an image in it, and some styled background colors. So it's an image view and a couple of text views. So it looks nice, and it looks reasonably complicated, but it's not that, it shouldn't be that tricky to replicate. So anyway, so we can, when we are dealing with this type of navigation bar, you have to have your mouse cursor or your finger right at the edge of the screen, and you can click and then hold your finger down or hold your mouse button down and then drag it out. With my example here, I'm using the mouse, but that's just because I'm using the emulator. And then you can, you can navigate to the home fragment. You can also navigate to the gallery fragment. So nothing much is happening with these examples. It's just that we've got these placeholder fragments. And I've got the same kind of placeholder fragments in my example, but it's way, way simpler. So with this example, they've also got an app bar. So they've got this menu bar on the left-hand side. I couldn't replicate that, and I couldn't get it working in my example, but maybe that's something that you guys can try. When I looked at that, I thought it's something that's not 100% essential for getting an app, a nav bar actually working. But the idea is that when you click on that, it's also a secondary way of opening up the nav bar. So I think with my simple example, I've somehow forgot a linkage, or I've somehow clobbered some code that I've taken from this generated project into my other project, and it's not 100% working. But I was able to replicate the actual nav bar behavior. And so you can simply drag out your navigation bar, your navigation bar, and then just click on the other icons, and then it will open up the other fragment. And we've got a menu over here for settings, and we've also got another little icon over here for doing other things. So this gives you I guess a nice example of what's available, what you can potentially do. You could take this generated project and then use that as a shell to create your own project for assignment 3. Or if you've already got a project, then what you might like to do is have a look at how the generated project is constructed, all of those fine details. There's also on Moodle, I've put some links up. Okay, so just down here, I've got some links that I found useful. But I always find particularly with the Google documentation, it seems a little bit terse, and it feels that they've missed some of the detail out. It's like they've just kind of glossed over a couple of the details. But this is another little guide that you can use to assemble your own navigation UI. So well worth looking at that in conjunction with, looking at today, the project that I'm going to look at today, and also the generated project that you can create yourself. Okay, so this is the complicated example. The key parts here, we can have a look at that. So the key parts are the activity main, and the key part there, if we have a look at the code, is that it has this new concept of a draw layout. So you might have seen things like a constraint layout or a linear layout, all of those different things. And so the layout for our activity when we want to use the navigation draw is the draw layout. So if you want to use this navigation draw technology, it's reasonably complex to set up. You can include fragments using the include tag to include the main body, I suppose, fragment that constructs your layout. So you kind of componentizing and assembling your layout rather than having everything embedded into the one file. And then down here, you also include a reference to your navigation view. And the key thing with this, I found, well, I'll talk about these properties in the other project where it's a little simpler, I think. And of course, we can control click into these other fragments. So we can do that now. We had a look at the header fragment before. This is the menu system over here. These are all of the different menu items. You can see that we've got drawables assigned for the icon. So that's the menu system, which we need to set up. We've also got a header layout as well. We just had a look at that, actually. And I think that all of the different things that we can look at here. The next thing to jump into is the body fragments. And this is just the main fragment which makes up the body, I suppose, of our application. So that's this section here. We've got a floating action bar. That's this little email icon. So you can see here that IC dialog email. That's the icon for this floating action bar that we've got down here at the bottom right-hand corner of our fragment. We've got an app bar, which has a toolbar inside of it. And so that's kind of like a header. The app bar layout, that's kind of like the header of our application. And then the floating action button, that's kind of like the trailer of our application. So that's down here. So the header's up here with our toolbar. And then in the middle, we've got another fragment. Okay, so what these fragments allow you to do is to reuse different bits and pieces of different layout files. So rather than embedding all of this into one huge file, you can kind of create different components and then include them as you need to. And did I see somebody sending a, oh, we've got more participants now. Okay. So we've componentized everything. So we can go into layout content main. And you can see here that we've again got another little fragment. This part is the key part because it allows, it's a fragment that can be switched out. So it's called the nav host fragment. And what it allows is the different fragments which make up things like the home, the gallery, and the slideshow, all of those different fragments which we're able to navigate to. It allows those to be all switched out based on the navigation graph, right? And that's something that we haven't really looked at before. And so the navigation graph is just over here. It's pretty much just a replication of the menu items. So if we open up menu, we can see that we've got a nav home, we've got a nav gallery, and we've got a nav slideshow. And then if we open up the activity main draw XML file, you can also see that we've got a nav home and a nav gallery and also a nav slideshow. And the important thing here is that these IDs, they have to match up. This navigation draw technology or framework, it's probably not really so much of a technology, but more of an Android framework that you can use, does a lot of things based off of IDs. So if the IDs don't match up correctly, then the whole application doesn't work, or parts of it work, but you don't get the full functionality. There's a lot of event listeners and things like that that are created for you automatically, but only if the IDs match up properly. So, and one of the situations where you need to make sure the IDs match up is between the items that you've got in your menu over here. So we've got ID nav home, and then over here in the fragment, we've got ID nav home. So they have to match up. So they have to match up. If they don't match up, then things get displayed, but you might end up having a navigation pane, a navigation draw that's not clickable. It'll sound like it's being clicked, but the event listener won't have been registered properly. What else do I need to show you here? So I've looked at how the navigation works with these. There's a design view for this. So when you come to creating these, well, I'll show you how to do this in the simpler example, because I still think this example that Google have given us, it's really quite complicated. It's good to go back to once you have a bit more of a basic understanding. So the other thing that we need to have is we also need to have all of these different libraries. So you need to have the Android Material Library, the Navigation Fragment Library, and also the Navigation UI library. And depending on your application, you probably also need to have a lifecycle library. I didn't include all of these extra libraries in the simple example, but it's probably, you know, if you need to use that extra functionality, then that's something that you're going to need to have to do. Right, so I've had a big picture look at that. And what else do we want to look at? Okay, and you can see over here, we've got our main activity. We've got set content view. And so set content view is probably looking familiar to you. And then everything else underneath it is quite a bit more complex. But what's happening there is we're really just getting linkages to our navigation drawer layouts, and then using that with our navigation drawer controller to automatically set everything up so that all of the event listeners and things are set up for us. So there's kind of some magic happening in the background that lets us set things up and respond to events automatically. So I'm just showing you and showing you the more complex example. Now we'll have a look at the simpler example, because I think it's gives you a bit more clarity about what you might need to do to add this to another project or a project that you've already got. Okay, so you can see already that my code, I've got a lot less code. Less code is more understandable. I think with the other example, Google, the developers at Google probably set that up so that, you know, it looks like a really flash demonstration of how navigation drawers work, but not necessarily for a developer's understanding. Okay, so we're back to our simple example, and you know, we can now slide our drawer in and out, and we can also navigate between fragments. So we can do all of the same things that we did in the other example, just in a much simplified manner. So I'll just dig into the detail about how I set this up. So this project, I started from scratch, and I used 2 or 3 different resources to try and just simplify that really complex example that Google gives you. Okay, so these are all of the different libraries that I've had to add to my Gradle file to get this working. So this was just, you know, copied over from the other project. And then I built the project, those dependencies were pulled down. Right, so then the next thing, we've got our activity main. And this is quite a bit simplified from the other example. Okay, so we've got another, I'll just get rid of all of these extra widgets that we don't need right now. And we might just look at this. So we have a drawer layout, and with that we've got a navigation view, which we had before, right? And this time, instead of having an include to include another fragment, we're just defining that we have a fragment that we want to include directly. And that fragment is the nav host fragment. Right, so there's a couple of things here that are important. the important things are the layout width and the height, and also the layout gravity. So the layout width, right, that needs to be wrap content. So if we go into the design view and we select navigation view, we can get into the layout properties. And normally when you drag your navigation view from your container widgets, normally when you drag these onto your screen, it'll give it a predefined width and height, right? But for it to actually work with a navigation drawer, it needs to wrap the content, right? So that means it's going to be, the layout width is going to be as wide as the elements that it's wrapping. So as wide as those menu items, including the icon. And then it also has to be as high as the parent window. So I don't have a toolbar in my simplified example here, so it just covers the entire screen. So you need to have these properties set. You also need to have the layout weight, the layout gravity set as well. So when you have the layout gravity set, you can slide it in and out. But if the layout gravity is not defined, then you find that your navigation view just doesn't work. So I've taken that out temporarily, and we'll just take a look, see what, and have a look at what happens when you don't have that. Okay, and so we've just got that nav drawer taking up the space of the entire screen, and it actually looks like it's crashed as well. And in fact, it has. So you can see here that we've got an legal argument exception, and it's complaining that navigation view is not a sliding drawer. And that's because we don't have that layout gravity field set. So that's a pretty key thing. And this is one of the little properties that you have to set, and in all of the documentation, it doesn't actually say you have to set that. So hopefully this is a little bit of a head start for you guys. So, once we put that back in, our navigation drawer should start working again. So just build and redeploy that file. Okay, and this looks like it's going to work. And you can see now that we've got a layout gravity of start, back in there, we can see our navigation drawer is working again. So it's, there's a bunch of new concepts that you have to deal with when it comes to actually implementing this. So that's navigation view. Other stuff that you have to do here, you have to set up a menu, and you have to set up your menu items. And with this, you just select the menu items that you want, and you can just drag them down here. And then you'll be given a new menu item. And you can see that you can also move them around as well to change the ordering. So I don't want that extra new menu item, so I'm just going to delete it. It's going to cause me problems, I think, because I don't have an extra item in my graph. So that's the menu system. We'll just come back here. So that's the navigation view widget. So we've discussed that. The next part is the nav host fragment. And this is what allows you to change between different fragments. So we've got an about fragment and we've also got a main fragment. Notice that we don't reference the about or the main fragment here inside of our fragment definition. Those references, they're all defined in our navigation graph, which is defined over here. And what I've done here is you have to specify a start, right? So that's the first fragment that you're going to display, or the home fragment. You can see there's a little home icon here. And so what you can do is you can click new destination, and you can create a new destination and add a new fragment, which I'm not going to do because it's probably going to break my project if I do that. So we've got the nav about here as well. Nav main, and whoops, we'll just go back. And so you can see here that this is where we actually specify our fragments and all of the information. Something that's pretty critical here though is that the IDs for the fragments, they have to match up with the IDs for the menus. So we've got nav about and we've got nav main. And then over here in the menu XML file, we've also got nav main and also nav about. So those have to match up, otherwise your navigation drawer isn't going to be clickable. So if I just show you what I mean there, I can just change this to broken. And we'll change the other one to broken as well. And then if we rerun this is one of the problems I had when I was setting it up. So I just thought I'd share because it might be likely that you have the same issue. Because apart from that generated project that you get, there's nothing else to kind of indicate that these IDs should be actually the same thing, unless you debug the Android framework. Okay, I'll just try running that again. It looks like it's totally broken now. Okay, well that's interesting. This was working previously. Okay, here we go. Right, and you can see here that when we start our application, it's causing an error. Right. So I'll just change that back. And we'll just remove broken from here as well. Save that again and run the program. And we should be back to everything working again. Okay, we've got those items back again. And we can switch between them. So that's the navigation graph and some of the problems that you can have with it. You need to be really careful that these IDs match up with what you've got in your main menu. The other part of this is the actual fragment. So you can, I'll just click through to the fragment about and the fragment main. So these are just different fragments that are that I've defined. So that's the about fragment. And so we've also got the main fragment over here. And so these have just, again, they've just got placeholder text views in there for just showing you how the navigation works, basically. I think that's pretty much it. The other main thing I have to show you is the code. Yeah, the code. So the first thing that you need to do with your main activity is to set up a draw layout, and then set up a nav controller. And that's going to correspond to the nav host fragment. And this nav controller and nav view is going to allow us to set up our navigation bar. So we get references to the controller, to the nav view, and then down here we can use the navigation UI framework code to set up our nav controller, and then that is where all of the magic happens for setting up our nav bar. So that's I guess the meat in the sandwich for setting everything up, and allows us to drag the nav bar out and then click on items and navigate to different fragments based upon what we have inside of our menu, and also based upon what we have in our graph XML file as well. So that is pretty much it from me for the for describing how navigation bars work. Does anybody have any questions? Okay, so looks like this is the navigation bar stuff. It's extremely complicated. If I think a good shortcut for dealing with it is to just create a pre-canned or pre-generated project. Just use the generated project that you get with Android Studio. That would be okay. You can use that as a shell project that you can then modify. Although the downside to that is that if something goes wrong, it'll be really, really hard to fix it, I think. So, one of those things, nice to use, and as Abdullah says, you don't have to necessarily use it. But it is on the, having said that, it is on the charts for getting a higher grade in terms of your assignment mark. So if you want to get a really good grade, you need to have either a recycler view or a navigation draw in your assignment, or both, which would be even better. Um, so that's all of that stuff. And what I wanted to talk about next is to just wrap up the course. The wrap up slides, of course, you should already have them. Those are all in the PowerPoint slides for last week, but I'll just talk about that now as well. There's actually not too much to talk about with wrapping up the course, really. Okay, here we go. So there's not too much to talk about with this, so I'll just go through it really quickly. Just need to get it to display on the right monitor. Okay. Okay, so we've got 2 slides left, which is great. I'm just going to share my screen again. Okay, so I just wanted to say that, you know, we've all done a good job on covering everything that we have covered. When you do this native Android programming, it is pretty damn hard, and it's not forgiving, which is, you know, as usual with programming. But you know, with Android, there's a lot of rough edges. And so we haven't been able to cover everything, but we have been able to cover the fundamental things so that, you know, you can now go on and you can call yourself a junior Android developer, really. You've got enough background to go and tackle other APIs that are available out there. You could look at including advertisements and things in your projects. We've started to have a look at fragments, but you know, there's a huge space with Android. There's third-party advertisement networks as well. There's virtual reality, there's augmented reality, all sorts of stuff. One thing I would check out if you're interested in phone development is Flutter. It's a cross-platform development environment based on, well, you use it in Android Studio, so it's based on Android Studio, and it allows you to write applications for both Android and also for iOS. And that's written in Dart and also, I believe, a little bit of Kotlin. But that's a new kind of beta project available from Google, which seems to still be under active development. In the corporate space, I know in the last few years, there's been a lot of interest in these PhoneGap solutions, where you could do semi-HTML apps with JavaScript and stuff, and build that into an Android or an iOS application. So a lot of these a lot of use cases is where you want to write a mobile application, but for both iOS and Android at the same time. And so that's where things like PhoneGap fit in. There's also things coming out, well, that have already come out, like React Native and React itself, which allow you to plug into native components. So that's getting a bit bigger, I suppose, in the mobile space. But it's still very, very useful to understand how native Android works. You get a much broader, I suppose, perspective. And so hopefully everybody has enjoyed the course. There is a course review survey. I believe it's has been sent around already. So do check that out, and please provide your feedback on the course. Look forward to hearing your feedback. I've got a few more points here, and we've got some questions, I think, in the chat, which I'm not which are not showing for me right now. Okay, here we go. Somebody's saying that looks very appealing now. Yes, it does. One thing with all of this stuff that Google makes is that you have to be careful when you buy into it. Sometimes Google introduce new things and they're all for it, selling it and saying this is marvelous, and then a year or two later they pull the plug on it. So Flutter is still in that I suppose early adoption phase. So the same thing with Dart. So you have to be a little bit careful. I've been burnt with Google before, learning their latest and greatest language or framework, and then all of a sudden they pulled the plug on it and it's no longer supported. So do be careful of that. And is there a more advanced paper in this area? We don't have a more advanced paper in Android, but there are other courses that you can take in mobile programming. I believe that there is a course in iOS programming that you should be able to take. But the person to talk to about that would be your program leader. Be right back. Applying to senior dev positions at Foodstuffs. Okay, not a question. Okay, right. Oh, and yeah, the iOS courses, that's a special topic too. Yeah. Yeah, so that's pretty much it, guys. I think a couple of other points I'd like to make. Good luck with everything. Good luck. This should be your third and final year if you're a BCS student, or a component of your graduate diploma, or a component of your postgraduate course if you're doing it as a postgraduate student. So good luck with all of that. Feel free to add me on LinkedIn. Feel free to put me down as a reference if you're applying for a job. All that I ask is that you send me a little note to say, hey, I've applied for this job, and I've talked to the interviewers, they're happy with me, and can you be my referee? I would be very happy to do that for everybody in the class. So I guess keep that in mind. The other thing is that try and be careful about memorizing everything. You don't really need to do that. You can get away with just using Android Studio. It's very powerful. You just need to know and appreciate the core concepts. You need to be able to also use all of the resources available to you, like debugging. I know that some people still aren't comfortable with debugging. They prefer to output things to the system log, which is okay, but that's I suppose an old-fashioned way of debugging. But if you can debug and inspect variables and things, that's a lot faster. Also, we should all be trying to be a lot more TDD and use test-driven development, so that we're all building and creating our unit tests at the same time as doing the development. And that kind of testing is really useful because it's automated. You can write the test case once, it works, and it can keep on working, and they can be guaranteed that your code is going to be working correctly for those test cases that you have. So that's pretty much it. It's been a good 13 weeks. Let's break now for 10 minutes, and then when we come back, everybody can go through their second assignments, the mini project specifically, and you can show us all what you've done. So I'm just going to go on mute, and then I'll come back in 10 minutes.